Growing Still is made on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge them and any other nations who care for the land, acknowledged and unacknowledged, recorded and unrecorded, as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land, traditional territory named Tkaronto, where the trees meet the water, the gathering place. We are youth that have come together and are settled on this land, creating this podcast. We do not support colonial forces that undermine, distort, or erase the vital role of Indigenous people in our world.
Welcome to Growing Still. I'm your host, Max.
And I'm your other host, Adam.
On this episode of Growing Still, we'll be talking about a mouthful of a topic.
Consent.
Woo! Consent can be a difficult topic to talk about, especially when in regards to mental health. So here's a little explanation that we think captures consent in a nutshell and its relationship with mental health.
Our first step that we strongly suggest taking when talking to youth or anyone about mental health is consent. If we define what consent means, it is to give permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. The reason why this first step is essential is because you can get someone to openly share about their mental health without pressuring them. Also, with mental health, interrogating or forcing a conversation upon someone can be more than just unhelpful, it can be harmful. Remember, mental health is dependent on the person, and the symptoms they experience cannot be guessed by an outside source, only through that person experiencing the symptoms.
So, my friend, let's call her Ashley, okay? So Ashley, she and her teacher didn't exactly have the best relationship. So, it was very, weird, and, when I say it, it sounds horrible, but it actually happened. So, Ashley had an IEP for her mental health, right? Very common. A lot of students have them. So, her teacher would kind of expose that to the whole class. When handing in assignments, oh, here, Ashley, yes, you can have extra time. Want to know why? Because of your IEP. So that was just a huge breach of consent, of privacy, of just everything. And they're supposed to be confidential. You're not supposed to be saying these things. It's not even supposed to be known by other students that you have one.
So Max, first off, what is an IEP? Why is it so important, and how does consent factor into all of this?
Adam, I'm really glad you asked this because there is a lot to cover with IEPs. So an IEP is an individual education plan. Basically, it offers students accommodations in different aspects of school. Some IEPs might offer more time to complete assignments, while other IEPs can offer time in your school's resource room. It's really dependent from person to person, and no two IEPs will look the same.
So that's all great, Max, but what part does consent play in all of this? I mean, that is what this whole episode's about.
Adam! I was just getting there. So, what's important to mention is IEPs can be given and made for a student for a multitude of reasons. Some IEPs are given out for things like peanut allergies, while others are given out for things related to mental health, be it borderline personality disorder or generalized anxiety disorder or any other kind of mental illness.
There can also be a fear, if I say anything that's, too, a fight that I had with my parents or whatever, what if, something happens and it's deemed, too intense or whatever, and, I can't see my parents anymore, that's always a worry for me. When I have big altercations with one of my parents, that, because, the times where they can kind of go against, what you want them to tell people is when it's for safety, and so there's always that fear of, am I telling them something that would make them think that I'm not safe? And so I always feel the need to temper it and be but I'm okay.
Violations of consent aren't always a legal issue. Sometimes it just comes down to straight ethics.
While the exposure of the IEP was a legal issue, many situations won't be as cut and dry.
Max, why don't you bring up that story you were telling me about?
So, for my writer's craft class, I wrote a really deeply personal essay about the way that I use writing to cope with my anxiety and my various mental health issues. And I sent it to my mom because my mom is very supportive of my art and we're really close, and I was really proud of what I had written. And then I found out later that she had forwarded it to a couple of her sisters, my aunts, without asking me permission first. And I was really upset, and she responded with, well, okay, but your aunts understand you so much better now. But that wasn't a part of my life that I necessarily wanted them to understand. And I started to kind of question myself and think, well, maybe I'm overreacting, because I was willing to show this to my mom, and I was willing to show this to my teacher, whose class I wrote it for. So, why couldn't I just show it to my aunts too? Why couldn't I be okay with that? But the thing is that when we're talking about consent, it's something that has to be on your own terms. You have a right to pick what you are and aren't comfortable with, whether other people, think that it makes sense or not.
Now, that may not have been a legal issue, but nonetheless, it was a violation of Max's consent, a violation of their trust with the person. That can fuck you up. That can break someone's whole trust system.
Before we go, we have one last little story to tell.
Now, this story I'm about to tell did not directly happen to me, but it did happen to my best friend, who we will call, for the purpose of this podcast, Richard. Now, Richard hadn't been going to school for a while. She wasn't feeling too well mental health-wise. And so I guess her guidance counselor got worried and contacted her therapist. And on the phone, the therapist basically told her guidance counselor everything that was going on. And then the guidance counselor called my friend Richard down to his office and told Richard about the conversation he had with her therapist. Now, no consent was given by Richard to her therapist to give that information to her guidance counselor. Whether they're both professionals or not, it doesn't matter. You always need to give consent to your therapist or to your guidance counselor to share information about you. When you go to see a therapist, usually, if not all the time, they will give you a form where you'll have to sign to give them consent to contact someone outside of you, basically.
Yeah, that's a really messed up situation.
Now, when you're in danger, your therapist has every right legally to tell your guardian what's poppin'. But if that's not the case,
then the therapist has no right, ethically or legally. It was completely out of line for them to share that information.
yeah, I couldn't believe it.
We need to listen to young people. We're allowed boundaries too.
So thanks for listening to us. Our next episode tackles step 2 to approaching someone about mental health, building trust.
Tune in next time. Subscribe and share, because we're great and there's a lot more to come.
If you have anything you want to ask us, you can leave a comment or email us directly at growingstillpodcast@gmail.com. That's all for now, and as always, our reminder to you is it's okay if you haven't gotten where you want to be.
It just means you're growing still.